The Sabbath, the seventh day of the week. From the beginning, God revealed a pattern of 6 days and then a Sabbath rest. God inscribed the importance of the Sabbath in the 10 Commandments. Through the prophets, God warned his people to keep the Sabbath. Christ kept the Sabbath. The prophets tell us that the Sabbath will be kept in the kingdom of God when it comes on earth. The apostles kept the Sabbath. What is this pattern of 6 days and then a Sabbath rest about? What is God trying to tell us about the Sabbath? Does it have prophetic significance? The Sabbath, prophecy to be fulfilled. What is God trying to tell us? In the Old Testament, we see that in Psalm 90, it says, "For 1,000 years in your sight are like a day." In the Old Testament, we see in the beginning, Adam in creation. In day 2, the second 1,000 years, we see Noah and the flood and Sodom and Gomorrah. Day 3, Abraham, Moses, Joshua. Day 4, David, Solomon, the temple, Daniel. All the way through the first 4,000 years of the Old Testament record, we see 4 days. Right at the beginning of day 5, we find that Christ appears at his first coming. And then the New Testament, the new covenant of the gospel begins. So what do we learn in the new covenant about this 6-day pattern of God? Well, first of all, we see that God repeats himself, and he says, "With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day." And since Christ, we've seen 2,000 years. 2 days go by. We're about at the end of day 6 in God's prophetic plan. Not only are we reminded in the New Testament that a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years is like a day to the Lord, but in Hebrews we're told that in the past God spoke through the prophets, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son. The Son of God, Christ, came at the beginning of day 5, and in Hebrews we're told that in these last days, God spoke to us through his Son. So, we have been in the last days for 2 days now, the last 2,000 years. There's only 1 day left. In the New Testament, we learn something else about the Sabbath recorded in Hebrews. Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. For we also have had the gospel preached to us just as they did. But the message they heard was of no value to them because those who heard it did not combine it with faith. Now we, who have believed, enter that rest just as God has said. So I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. And yet his work has been finished since the creation of the world. For somewhere he has spoken about the 7th day in these words, "And on the 7th day God rested from all his work." And again, in the passage above, it says, "They shall never enter my rest." It still remains that some will enter that rest. The Sabbath, prophecy to be fulfilled. If Christ kept the Sabbath, and the apostles kept the Sabbath, and the earlier church kept the Sabbath, what happened? The organized church abandoned God's Sabbath when Sunday was adopted by the Roman Catholic Church at the Council of Laodicea in AD 364. Beware the traditions and teachings of men. God has always held out for the people of God the Sabbath as something sacred to him. It was made for man. Yet, it appears that we've forgotten about the Sabbath, and we've abandoned the Sabbath. We don't know what the Sabbath means. The Bible is very clear about the Sabbath, but the teachings and traditions of man have put a smokescreen, hidden the Sabbath, so we barely know what it means, let alone what significance it has for the future. At the second coming of Christ, the Sabbath will be reinstituted.